Everyone, and thanks for joining us now for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. First of three storms to affect the area, to affect Alaska, especially southern western Alaska. Actually, much of Alaska will be affected by these three systems moving in. The first one came in this morning, and McHugh Creek, 79-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Cape Newenham out in the southwest coast, 63 miles an hour. Rabbit Creek on the Anchorage hillside, 60 miles per hour. And with those winds, which gusted to 50 or more miles an hour, give or take there on King Salmon, that pushed their temperature from 4 degrees 24 hours ago to 52 this morning Fahrenheit. And that was a record high for this date. For the 30th of December, and that beat the old record of 49 degrees set just 4 years ago in 2014. Moving on to the graphic, or the hazardous weather graphic here. Storm coming up overnight tonight. High wind warning out for the Anchorage area, Anchorage hillside, Turnagain Arm, and possible blizzard conditions through Turnagain Pass here. So definitely big increase in the winds coming back in again. May probably even get stronger than what we saw earlier today with this next one. High wind warning out for the Bristol Bay area for 60-85 mile-per-hour winds. Strongest gusts along the coastal area. Same thing for the Alaska Peninsula. High wind warning out tonight. That ends at probably 6 to 8 in the morning tomorrow, depending on when the winds actually drop off. High wind warnings out for the Alaska Range through the mountain passes, gusts 80 miles per hour from the south, and that's out for the rest of the year until Tuesday. And winter weather advisories up here in the interior. Otherwise, winter storm warnings out over the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, southern coast Seward Peninsula, and the Bering Strait coast. And that's out tonight into tomorrow. And that moisture pushing northward. We've got winter storm warnings out for the Kobuk Valley, the Koyukuk Valley, Ambler, Bettles, on up in toward Arctic Village along the southern slopes of the Brooks Range there. With that moisture coming northward, should lay down a fair amount of snow with gusty winds, especially higher elevations here. That's why we have the winter weather advisories out for the upper Yukon Valley, the greater Fairbanks area over the Tanana, 40-mile country. Could see gusts 40 to 50 miles an hour in these areas over the next 24 hours or so, and that'll create lower visibilities in blowing snow, and also the same thing over the interior of the Seward Peninsula. Also along the northwest coast, winter weather advisories out. These out a little longer, these out through tomorrow night. And looking at satellite imagery today, the first storm scooting up the coastline, weakening quite rapidly right in here, and you can see it's really lost its identity, at least on the infrared satellite front, rapidly moving northward and only edging its way eastward here, as you can see the breaks behind it. And then the next system already coming up to the Alaska Peninsula, rapidly moving at the cold low kind of in place out here over the, or just south of the western Aleutians, all that cold air coming down. Frontal boundary right through here, so all these storms developing along that frontal boundary and rolling on northward. This one pretty strong, going to track farther to the east and be even stronger than this previous one. So we're looking for stronger winds, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, southern Alaska, and pretty windy conditions throughout much of the interior, especially above about 1,500 feet over interior Alaska. And pushing this through again, quite a area of moisture. Rainfall amounts about an inch along the southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, or I'm sorry, not the Kenai Peninsula, the Alaska Peninsula, Chignik and False Pass, both a little over an inch of rain with this system. Kodiak about 2/3 of an inch falling today, and winds again increasing here. They didn't really drop off that much in Turnagain Arm, near 80-mile-an-hour gusts earlier today at McHugh Creek, and they're still gusting about 60 to 65 miles an hour this afternoon, actually showing some signs of increasing already here across the Kenai Peninsula as this system tracks northward. And it's really a perfect setup for strong winds across southern Alaska, especially through the mountain passes. These lows track about 60 north. That's usually when we get the strongest wind speeds. That's just what happened today when this one scooted by. Next one coming up the Alaska Peninsula. This for actually late this afternoon, already into the eastern Aleutians there with moderate heavy amounts of rain, as I mentioned, and warmer conditions, rainfall along the coast there, mixture inland. Not much here over the eastern interior due to the downsloping off the Alaska Range, but then the upsloping, especially back to the northwest, snow and blowing snow with this feature all the way down the St. Lawrence Islands, supporting those winter storm warnings. And not all that bad north of the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast, southern panhandle, not bad at all, maybe a little bit of clearing. And here it went some rain and snow showers with not so windy conditions, except out towards Shimei, north winds gusting 60 miles an hour, producing snow in that area. And for tonight, this low tracks right northward again, farther to the east. This is all that's left of that former one, kind of stalls out and just really dissipates. This one tracking farther to the east. It looks like between 2 and 5 a.m. That's when south central Alaska, especially Turnagain Arm, Anchorage Hillside from Anchor Point up to Palmer, we'll see the strongest wind gusts, and then the warning out until 6 a.m. Pretty gusty winds, gales, possible storm force winds here, eastern North Gulf Coast, windy and wet over the Panhandle, dry north of the Alaska Range, but windy with winter weather advisories, and snow tapering off along this frontal boundary here, the heaviest amounts back to the west, down through the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island, and then cold air plunging southward on the backside of this system here that's near the central Aleutians, bringing snow into the far western Aleutian areas with mostly rain showers, southwest winds, be mostly in the form of rain at sea level here. Eastern Aleutians are up the Alaska Peninsula, coasting the Kodiak Island, southern Kenai Peninsula, well, and now stay snow out over the Yukon and half of the Kuskokwim Delta. Then for tomorrow, that low moves up to the Seward Peninsula by about 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Front with it all the way up, crossing the Brooks Range, but the snow getting hung up along and south of the Brooks Range. Again, winter storm warnings for the snow and blowing snow, and still windy in the interior here. Stays windy through the Alaska Range passes through tomorrow night. And this low drifting northeastward a little bit, and that's going to pull really cold air down in across deep in the central Aleutians, eventually into the Fox Islands there. So snowfall levels right back down to sea level, especially out here to the west and to the northwest. Mostly snow, starting out a mixture, but trending toward mostly snow for the Pribilofs. And the Panhandle has a front pushing through there, so rain lightening up, changing to showers here in the afternoon, and a mixture of precipitation along the North Gulf Coast. Next system down here forecast to track northward, again, even a little farther to the east, maybe just as strong as one coming through tonight. So that could give another round of strong winds here, but difference is this front already well off to the east. Southern Alaska here, south central Alaska, usually get the strongest winds when this low track north of 60 north, and the front is to the west along the Alaska Range. Anyway, it'll still be quite windy once again with that pulling up. Snow and blowing snow out over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Narrow band of snow with the main front there into the interior, but not much, especially north of the Alaska Range. Dry farther to the north. Wind, rain heavy at times. Looks like gale force winds for the Panhandle. Snow and blowing snow, really cold air mass coming down across the Bering Sea. That'll shift into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula during Tuesday afternoon. Quite cold conditions, snow showers over the remainder of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Lows for tonight, still below zero, northeast interior, Arctic coast north slope, and a little above here for the Tanana Valley. Central interior, above freezing, almost near 40 for the lows of Kodiak, 41 for the low tonight, lower to mid 30s, southern Alaska and the Panhandle. Highs for tomorrow, only 5 to 7 below here up there along the central Arctic coast. Otherwise in the teens, look at the lower 30s here, all the way up into the eastern Norton Sound area, and that's Unalakleet, forecast high of 32, and 20s to mid 30s in the Tanana Valley. Warmer, Healy could push up to 42 degrees with the winds. 40 to 45 south central Alaska with that strong southerly wind flow. That'll extend all the way down to northeast Bristol Bay and Kodiak. Highs lower to mid 40s for the Panhandle. Following the next day, we've got lows here a little below zero, just 5 to 10 below along the Arctic coast, and 0 to 10 above through the Brooks Range. Falling down to lower 30s, southern Alaska, mid-20s back into Bristol Bay, and mid-20s for the Pribilofs, and looks like 30s for the Aleutians, and upper 30s to near 40 there along the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, shaping up like this, we've got temperatures above zero across all of the Arctic coast and the North Slope. In fact, could get into lower 20s on the lee side of the Brooks Range there a little bit. Otherwise, 20s, lower to mid here through the central interior. Mid-30s for south central Alaska. Highs in the upper 30s here for northeast Bristol Bay, but chillier back to the west, back down below freezing for your highs for the Pribilofs.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Lots of IFR moving northward, covering much of the western interior right up to the Brooks Range and along Point Hope, probably up to Point Lay, marginal VFR over to maybe as far east as Nuiqsut, and then better conditions here over the eastern interior north of the Alaska Range. IFR up along and on the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, and also into the eastern Copper River Basin on back toward Passage Canal, and a swath off the southeast coast with IFR over the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay. IFR kind of retreats to Lynn Canal here, and this area pushes off to the east. So IFR southern Panhandle better in the north, IFR here along and south of the Brooks Range, especially the Koyukuk Valley, Kobuk Valley, much of the northwest interior of the Seward Peninsula. IFR here over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and looks like Togiak Bay on up to the Alaska Range. A little bit of improvement tomorrow afternoon, becoming VFR Cook Inlet and Kodiak Island, marginal for the Alaska Peninsula, marginal for the Aleutians. And then for Tuesday morning, more IFR here along and off the southwest coast up to St. Lawrence Island, really covering much of the central Bering Sea. Marginal VFR here at the Aleutians, with the exception of Shimei and Attu, into the IFR, and mostly marginal for the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Again, IFR, eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, and maybe the Talkeetnas on up to Isabel Pass, Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai Peninsula, across Yakutat, and on down the Panhandle, IFR. For the afternoon, IFR holds here for the southeast coast through Tuesday afternoon. Also the Coast Range, southern Copper River Basin, and again the southern slopes of the central Alaska Range and areas of the east side all the way down to northeast Bristol Bay, and then areas of IFR back to the west and northwest all the way up to the Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, and IFR hugging the Arctic coast, marginal VFR, Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And for the passes, southerly flows, so lowest conditions, southern approach for Anatuvik, and same thing for Adigan, VFR north side through the pass, marginal IFR southern entrance, and then for Lake Clark and Merrill, occasional IFR tomorrow. Lowest conditions on the eastern approaches of both passes. Same thing for Rainy, that's you probably find the IFR, otherwise marginal. And for Windy, south side, IFR, north side into the valley, VFR. And for Isabel, IFR becoming marginal into the afternoon. And for Mentasta, VFR with possible marginal VFR on the southern entrance. And Tanita, IFR to start, becoming marginal into the afternoon. And for Portage, optimistically, starting out IFR, optimistically, that looks like it could trend into VFR conditions later in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels at the surface, back down close to the a little closer to the Pribilofs than today, and still north of the Aleutians. Up north and across southwest interior, those strong southerly flows, series of lows pulling northward, and that also pulls some warmer air up into the eastern Gulf of Alaska, 2,000 to 6,000 feet here across the southeast coast. And icing, heaviest to be down here over the Panhandle, a batch moving through of considerable moderate, and then that tapering off to no icing here over most of southern Alaska. And then this area lifting northward, areas of isolated moderate below about 3,000 feet, mostly the rime variety. Jet stream, low tracking northward tomorrow with the storm that's coming through actually overnight tonight here across Bristol Bay and then that'll be up into there tomorrow. Another one back here, the next one. So good jet, 150 knots across Kodiak Island, ridging, starting to slip east of the Panhandle. Southwesterlies 100 knots there. Taking a look at at 9,000 feet. Strong southwest flow, 35 to 50 knots here across the Panhandle. Southerlies 30 to 40, kind of a break. This system rolling up by tomorrow afternoon to near St. Lawrence Island, taking the stronger winds, 50, 60 knots with it. The next one down here developing, you see quite strong winds with that, up to 70 knots, so that'll be tracking right into Bristol Bay. 3,000 feet, same pattern, 60 to 75 knot winds with this next one. The one coming across the peninsula tonight up to the Seward Peninsula by tomorrow afternoon with the 60 knot winds up into the western interior, and easterlies 30 along the Arctic coast. Back to the west with the main anchor low here, more or less. Northwesterlies 45 in a narrow band there, dropping off considerably out over the western Aleutians. Turbulence with all the wind. Widespread moderate chop, central southern Alaska, the Panhandle, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and the central Aleutians.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
It's kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It's a lot different than Earth.
Moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make one lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
Takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
The same speed.
Right. The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot.
I see.
And it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture, you can replay that and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called. These are stationary in appearance. And they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures, if you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see, is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites.
Okay.
That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet, and for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit, which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there. But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail. The kind of detail, because you're close in.
Very high resolution.
You couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by, and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits. Each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion. The same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun, they govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right, okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Amazing stuff.
It's a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on Dehne and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis. Just a few tweaks done on it from what we had yesterday. And the forecast, southerly winds, it'll retreat a little bit here with those winds, with the incoming systems up here north, actually away from Bristol Bay. The most melt is expected to occur where the ice is thinner here, and that's in Bristol Bay. And of course, whatever's in northern Cook Inlet is going to take quite a beating as well. And for the coastal water forecast, gales all along the southeast coast tomorrow, about 35 knots on the south coast, 40 to east 45 in the extreme north coast, Lynn Canal, south 30, seas 5 feet. Small craft advisories for both Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. And gales for Clarence Strait on Tuesday, southeast 35 knots, seas 10 feet, but down to 20 knots Stevens Passage, southeast 15 Lynn Canal, south 35 along much of the coastline, 40 knots southwesterlies there, blowing in toward Yakutat with 20-foot seas. And for Bristol Bay, I'm ahead of myself, Bristol Bay here in a couple of minutes. Prince William Sound, gales south 35 knots, seas 9 feet. Full gales here along the North Gulf Coast, out of the southwest, seas 20 to 23 feet, all the way down to the Barren Islands. Storm warnings for Cook Inlet, south winds 50 knots, seas 20 feet. Southwest 50 knots, Kamishak Bay with 21-foot seas. And then for Tuesday, bring it down a little bit. Still quite windy north of the Forelands, south 30 knots. Good gale south of the Forelands there, and still storm force winds out of the south for Kamishak Bay. And south 50 knots, 27-foot seas for the Barren Islands, and southerly gales for the North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, still pretty windy, but under gale force, south 30, seas 7 feet. Kodiak Island, southwest, 40 to 45 knots, seas 20 to 25 feet. Sitkinak to Castle Cape, southwest 35, southwest 40 for Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Southerly winds at 20 knots with 13 to 21-foot seas. And then the next day, we've got storm warnings out for the Alaska Peninsula. Good westerlies, 50 to as high as 55 knots, seas building to 30 feet. West 40 for Bristol Bay, seas 12 feet, and 50 knots. Storm warnings out for Kodiak for Tuesday. Southwest 50 knots, seas up to 28 feet. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, south, mostly 30 knots there, 11 to 25 foot seas. Could see some gales here south of Nikolsky. Northwest gales, Adak and Atka, 40 knot northwest gales with seas up to 25 feet. And then falling back to small craft advisories as you head west. Those even drop down under to about 20 knots. Still small crafts due to the 9-foot seas, but winds under 25 knots, 25 here, and then about 30 knots out of the west, Adak and Atka. 40 knots, 40 to 50 knot winds for the Fox Islands, all out of the west with seas as high as 30 feet. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, that's where the winds will be the strongest. Southwest 30 right into the bay there, 13-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the Pribilofs. Lighter winds, St. Matthew Island, 15 out of the northwest. North 35, St. Lawrence Island. And moving on to Tuesday, Norton Sound. I got Bristol Bay for some reason, but Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, north 25, northwest 25 to 30. Brisk wind and small craft advisories there along the southwest coast. 25 knot northwesterlies again. This will be pulling cold air south and southeastward again with 40 knots out of the northwest for the Pribilofs, 15-foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east 30 tomorrow. Brisk wind advisories all along the coast, all the way down across the Chukchi Sea. And for Tuesday, lighter winds, northwest for the Chukchi Sea, easterlies 20 up to Cape Beaufort, west side 20 knots. In fact, the entire Arctic coast, east at 20. Moving on to, recapping tonight's weather again. Next strong storm already at the Alaska Peninsula there, pulling northward. That's going to produce 60 to 85 mile per hour wind gusts here across southern Alaska, especially through the mountain passes. Turnagain Arm, high wind warnings out, Anchorage up to Palmer, and Turnagain Arm, as well as winter storm warning out, possibly for around Turnagain Pass or snow and blowing snow. High wind warnings out until next year for the Alaska Range, and winter storm warnings out here for the northern interior. Back to St. Lawrence Island. Rain, wind push into the panhandle and continue throughout the day tomorrow. Improving here in the afternoon, southern Alaska. Warning should end, but continue up here as this batch of moisture shifts up toward the Brooks Range. Could see snow, definitely windy conditions, winter weather advisories. Next, snow out over the Aleutians with that system. This next system coming northward, much like the one tonight, coming in maybe a little farther to the east. Another round of wind and warmer temperatures with rain and wind pushing into the panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.